Hello and welcome to the ROKER Report podcast in association with Sunderland Community Soup Kitchen. It's Martin Wanless here, and with me to dissect Sunderland's 1-0 home defeat to Charlton Athletic is Malc Dugdale. How are you, mate?
Good morning or good evening to you, Martin. I'm good. A little bit disappointed with the weekend's outcomes, but it wasn't as bad as some recent poor performances, so I'm sure we'll get into that.
And also on the line is BBC Radio Newcastle's Sunderland commentator, Nick Barnes. Nick, how are you today?
Good. I'm like Malcolm, disappointed with the result, but I see it, as I did the Portsmouth game, as just a hiccup. I'm not no real wider concerns, although maybe one or two issues arose from those two games, actually, which perhaps are worth wider consideration.
Indeed. Well, yes, we suffered our first home defeat of the season as managerless Charlton rather predictably beat us 1-0 in a pretty eventful game at the Stadium of Light. And it's one of those things, isn't it? My heart sank on, I think it was Thursday, when the news of Nigel Adkins' departure came through, and you just knew what was on the cards, didn't you? Johnny Jackson taking over. Nick, what effect do you think that has on the team and had on the Charlton team? Because we've seen the results of Charlton so far this season. I think they'd won one home game and one away game. They'd been playing poorly. We speak to a fan as part of our sort of pre-match coverage before every game, and the Charlton fan who we interviewed on the site said, one of their big problems was a lack of fitness, and it seemed completely the opposite. I was waiting for them to run out of steam. So,
well, interesting what you say about fitness, because Benno mentioned that as well, that he'd obviously heard or spoken to someone that said that they had a problem with fitness. Well, that evidently wasn't the case, because they seemed to be full of running from start to finish. My fear was, like you, I think as soon as we saw the news that Adkins had been sacked, your heart sinks, because, and I remember Mansfield coming to the Stadium of Light last year and Nigel Clough taking over only the day before, and Mansfield ran out 1-0 winners. I then thought, this was a slightly different scenario, because that was a cup game and, the teams changed around, and this is a league game, and Sunderland still got a very strong 11. But I think the issue with Charlton is that I also heard, and I was chatting to a couple of their reporters, that at times this season they played some brilliant football, but that's been let down by their inability to defend and a general lack of confidence, and things just not, the system just not working for Nigel Adkins. So, the kernel of a good team is there at Charlton. It just hadn't come together. And I think that, combined with the fact that Johnny Jackson was given the job on a caretaker basis, and the Charlton fans love him. For them, he's a real favourite. He's been a player there for 8 years. He's been on the coaching staff for another 3 years. So he's, inured in sort of Charlton Athletic, even though he's a former Tottenham player. And I thought, well, okay, so combine it all, and he wants the job. And then, typically he was canny with his team selection, as managers always do, put a couple of players in against their former clubs, George Dobson and Adam Matthews. Plus, Jayden Stockley up front, who's a handful, and we saw that. And a game plan which was clearly to pressure, get in Sunderland's faces, and exploit that, and they did. And they their gamesmanship, I don't like it. I think even Lee Johnson sort of said afterwards that, look, if it's Sunderland in that position and looking to win a game, they'd probably do the same. His issues were with the refereeing and the inability of the referee to crack down on things and put a stop to things happening earlier in the game, which led to sort of problems later in the game. So there's sort of one or two issues around it. But I think, ultimately appointing a manager who's, Charlton through and through, who's determined to get the job and had a game plan, it came together for them.
We'll come back to Mr. Drysdale, because I've spent all afternoon making voodoo dolls of him. But let's talk about the team selection, Malc. Unchanged from Tuesday night's 4-0 win at Crewe. I think Pritchard was the only doubt sort of coming into the game, wasn't he? He had a bit of a neck injury. I think after the match he'd said that he had been through quite a lot of pain this week, and it's not right, but he sort of battled through. We had the likes of Evans and Gooch and Alves back on the bench. So, Malc, were you surprised to see an unchanged team, or would you like to see some of those returning players just thrown straight back into the starting 11?
I wasn't surprised to see an unchanged team because, those couple of away results that we've had, how could you criticise the coach for not rotating people we've done well in the trophy and such. We've done well away from home, which was an area, for a lot of people we wanted to improve on. So, I wasn't surprised that the team didn't change greatly. I was a little bit surprised that after the first 15, 20 minutes, something different wasn't tried out on the grass, because it was clear, as Nick touched on, what their approach was going to be. They were going to be physical to the very edge of the rules of the game, hoping that the referee potentially wouldn't, make some difficult decisions. And clearly that plan worked. And I don't think the team that played the last game was necessarily the right selection if the coach had a crystal ball and knew the approach they were going to take at the start of the kickoff at 3:00. But, if we play our way and we play our football, it shouldn't really matter that much which approach that they come up with. But they prevented us from doing that. They did what we do to teams, including back in the years when we were in the Premier League. We'd press tight, be physical. We'd have a lot of people imposing themselves on their opponent kind of player and stuff like that. So I was more disappointed's a strong word, because it was one of them games that could have gone either way. But I was more surprised that the coach didn't do more with the bench earlier in the game to react to the way that they had clearly set themselves out. But there is an argument that no matter what he did, the way that the officials were, it might not have actually made that much difference. So maybe that was just me clutching at straws. I don't know.
I think, Nick, in your interview with Lee Johnson on Friday, he sort of identified, didn't he, that all of the homework about Charlton kind of goes out the window when they've got a new manager. And he talked about sort of tactical flexibility being needed, and the onus really being on the players and the staff, of course, to kind of figure out what Charlton were going to do and come up with a plan and adapt in the game to do that. And post-match, he kind of said 4 or 5 players were doing their own thing and 5 or 6 players were sticking to the game plan, the protocol. So obviously something didn't quite work there. And it kind of, it's a little bit, I guess it's something that comes with the younger side, doesn't it? But slightly concerning because, the Portsmouth game, which I think is a good comparison to this game in terms of things going against us. Obviously, the pitch at Portsmouth went against us. Charlton's game plan, plus the referee, went against us. And we didn't really know how to react to it. Whereas in other games this season, when it's been a purely footballing game and we can stick to our game plan and go out and, really be focused on what we're doing, the things that we can alter within the confines of that are okay. But when a curveball gets thrown at us, we don't really seem to react to it. Now, is that something that you think is just a one-off at Portsmouth? That the Portsmouth game was ridiculous, and I think you can put that to one side in terms of the pitch. But I was a little bit disappointed in the way that we reacted, and that's on the field and off the field in terms of Charlton, as Malc touched upon, those tactical changes that come through. So is that something that we should be watching out for in future games? That's something that Lee Johnson's going to be thinking about over the next few weeks?
I think it's a good point, and I think Lee Johnson touched on it to an extent after the game against Charlton by saying that maybe they have to address their recruitment in terms of teams. If they're going to adopt those tactics, more teams in League One, or the majority of teams in League One, are going to play those sort of tactics. Are Sunderland recruiting the wrong sorts of players? They need to look again at the sorts of players they are bringing into the squad to be able to deal with teams who play like that. Because I think, you make a good point that I think in both those games, Portsmouth and Charlton, Sunderland didn't react. They didn't change. Bennett did say in the first half, don't get sucked in by Charlton into playing their game. Stick to the way that Sunderland play. And I can see what he means. And don't get sort of ruffled up and lose your shape. And in time, I think his point was that Charlton will run out of steam and Sunderland's game plan will come to the fore. But it didn't. And I think that's something they'll probably look at quite long and hard as to how they can change a game when you are come up against teams like Charlton. And they weren't helped by the referee. Darren Drysdale had a really poor game, and that is another mitigating factor. But you look at the Sunderland squad and the players within that squad, it is a young team, and it's not a big, strong, physical team. You haven't got Jayden Stockley's, John Marquis's, you haven't got those sort of players in this squad. It's very much, a footballing squad, a team that's there to play football, as we all want to see it played. So there's a fine line between that sort of squad and do you bring in one or two players that when you need to, you can bring them off the bench and you can change either the dynamic of the defenders or the dynamic in midfield or the dynamic up front to try and counter some of the opposition tactics. And I think, for me, the Portsmouth and Charlton games, they've raised a couple of alarm bells in that respect. I still don't think we've got a crisis by any stretch of the imagination, because I think on most occasions Sunderland will be a better footballing team than most teams they play against. And Wycombe will be another case in point, I think, especially when we go to Adams Park, another team that will try and rough Sunderland up, because I think they have a sense that those sort of tactics do seem to pay against Sunderland.
Well, let's get into the game itself. And I think in the first 5 or 10 minutes, we actually started pretty brightly. We had a couple of chances. O'Brien had a chance when he sort of cut in back onto his right foot and tried to curl it. And McGeady had a bit of a chance. And we were looking all right, weren't we? And I think Charlton were almost keeping the fingers crossed and being very determined not to concede an early goal, which would obviously have got the crowd really going and potentially open the floodgates. And as soon as Charlton kind of thought, we've got past the first 10 minutes here and we haven't conceded, they really stepped up and started to put a few challenges in. And then, of course, the Mr. Drysdale show started. And, it started in the very first second, didn't it, with the kickoff. And the Charlton player came through ONeill, which I was pretty certain that was going to be or should have been a booking at any other stage of the game. But I have to say, and I've been spending a lot of time today thinking about this, I reckon that is the most inept refereeing performance I've ever seen in football. I can't remember a game where a referee has not given so much. Usually when you criticise referee, it's for picking up everything and blowing his whistle at every occasion. And this guy didn't do that. He was letting so many things go. And even there was an early one in the first half, wasn't there, when McGeady went down the right wing and the lad just ran over into him to knock him off the ball. And that was a no foul. And it just continued from there. Like, we've seen bad decisions at the Stadium of Light before. Like, we've seen Gary McAllister get a penalty when he was tripped up on the halfway line and stuff like that. But in terms of like the overall refereeing performance, Malc, I thought that was unbelievable. Am I overreacting or was it that bad?
I don't think you're overreacting, Martin. My issue is I was in the lower east stand. It's a bit of a kind of superstition rather thing. A few years ago, me and my lad went there and we had a really good game. And because of this being the first home visit that we've had this season because of work and family commitments and stuff, I thought, right, I'm going to go in the same area. I'm not going to change things, you know what I mean? So we were in the lower east stand, and the view from down there, when you're trying to look at the whole game's not great, although it's really close to the pitch and it's a good view. But even from that angle, it was a right old bag of spanners, wasn't it? It really, really was not good. I mean, I was looking straight at Luke O'Neill's face when that Charlton player came straight through the back of him in the centre circle after kick-off, and I thought, what's going on? And that definitely laid out the kind of approach that Charlton were clearly going to use for the remainder of the game. They were going to just get in people's faces, kick them a bit and try and get away with it, intimidate them, push them around, hopefully get some kind of weird and wonderful kind of spawny goal or whatever, and then do a Wycombe and just time waste like to Kingdom Come. But yeah, the ref was bloody awful. The linesman were bad as well. Sometimes you have a lino that kind of starts waving his flag a bit to give the ref a bit of an indication, that was a bit out of order. The linesman on the east stand side didn't see at least a couple of offsides. There was, in the second half, there was a big push in McGeady's back when he was going down the right wing. Guy just shoved him in the back and he fell over, didn't even give a free kick, and the ref went like this, tapping his shoulder as if it was short. How can it be shoulder to shoulder when the bloke pushed him from behind? Do you know what I mean? So it was comical. The problem is that's not really ever going to change in League One. We cannot use that as a stick to beat ourselves with, or we cannot really expect much better, because that's the standard of referees at that level. We can whinge about it. We can talk about it with, people with a lot of knowledge about the game like Nick, but it is what it is. So we've got to adapt and make sure that the influence of the ref and the linesman doesn't influence the game, and we didn't do that. We didn't play our game. But I agree. I would have had a more concrete opinion if I was watching it like on TV or via a stream or whatever, like you did, Martin. But it's certainly by 60% plus the worst refereeing performance I've seen in being a Sunderland fan for over 35 years. So yeah, I agree.
Nick, from your vantage point in the commentary position?
Well, I don't disagree with pretty much everything Malcolm said. I mean, I think ultimately Malcolm's right. We can't look and blame the referee for the result. I think, as much as we'd like to do that and use it as a scapegoat, I think Lee Johnson was right afterwards. And he was fairly actually calm. I mean, he hates losing, but he did actually make the point that Sunderland didn't show enough quality around the penalty area. And that was right. I mean, O'Brien's passing was a bit off kilter, off radar. They did have chances. They hit the bar, but they weren't as clinical as they've been in previous games. I think if they'd been as clinical as they had been at Crewe, we're possibly looking at a 1-0, 2-1 win for Sunderland. But there's no question the referee malign influence on the game. And I think the other issue was one which we were mystified after the game when Lee Johnson came through and said that Jayden Stockley had headbutted Tom Flanagan, and that will go to the FA and he will get a 3-match ban. Now, none of us in the press room saw it, and we were absolutely mystified by it. And we spoke to the Charlton press team, and they hadn't seen it either. It was only afterwards, and I spoke to a few friends who'd been at the game, and I said, "Did you see anything between Flanagan and Stockley?" They said, yes, there was a clear headbutt. Now, okay, we didn't see it. Fans saw it, and I give the referee the benefit of the doubt there. Maybe he hadn't seen it, but it's sort of indicative of what was going on in the game and what Charlton were getting away with. And Malcolm's absolutely right. There were several instances where players were clearly pushed over, pushed down, fouled, and the referee gave absolutely nothing. And it is also, again, it's a marker of League One. And I think as much as it is, it's galling and it's irritating, I think we've just got to accept that's the level of, that's the standard we're going to be watching week in, week out. And, Sunderland have got to, in many ways, rise above that and find that little bit of quality to win games. And so we're not having the argument about we've lost the game because the referee was poor.
And it wasn't the most vicious of headbutts. I must admit, I didn't have a clue what Lee Johnson was talking about either until you actually search and see the video and you actually see some replays of it. There was a bit of a headbutt, Malc, but it wasn't the most violent of actions, was it? But I think if Flanagan goes down, something probably happens, but he stands his ground. He's got a bit of blood coming from his mouth. It's kind of just play on, and the referee's not bothered about it, is he?
You're almost a victim from being a self-respecting footballer and not dropping on the floor and rolling around like a South American winger. You know what I mean? You're almost losing out because you don't do what we really don't want to see. And I think that's just fundamentally wrong. Fair enough that the two assistant refs and the referee might not have seen it. I didn't see it. I was at the wrong end of the pitch anyway. Obviously, most of the passionate Sunderland fans in the south end of the ground will have seen it happen. If he had blood coming from his gob, then that's a bit of an indicator that it was something, moderately significant at least. So maybe it will be reviewed, and maybe the FA will ban the guy. The problem is that's of no use to bloody Sunderland, is it? He's going to get banned for maybe 3 games for a deferred red card or a review red card. That's of no benefit to the situation that we were in. But it's bang out of order. Should Flanagan have gone down like the sack of spuds? I don't know. The umpires in all sports should be good enough to spot that and eradicate it without the need for amateur dramatics. But in League One, they're just not sometimes. So hopefully it does get reviewed and the punishment will be leveraged. I suppose the only slight grace we can take from it is if he does get a 3-match ban retrospectively, maybe it's a signal to other teams that you can't do so much of that without people being punished, at least by video review later on. That might make a difference, but it doesn't have any benefit for the team that is subject to that problem at the time.
I haven't had a look at Charlton's fixtures, but if he does get a 3-match ban, Charlton will probably be playing Wigan, Wycombe and Ipswich in the next 3 games, won't they?
And it's an interesting one about this whole, theatrical going down. I mean, I'm thinking back to Gillingham as well, when Embleton's tackle on Jack Tucker, and Jack Tucker's reaction was, it was well over the top. But I think without doubt that was part of the contributory factor in Embleton being shown a red card, when it was also right in front of the management benches, in front of Steve Evans and Paul Rayner. And the combination of Jack Tucker's reaction and Steve Evans and Paul Rayner on the touchline 10 feet away from the referee, without question, I think influenced his decision, because the reaction of people like Danny Collins, Gary Bennett, Marco Gabbiadini was a yellow card challenge. And had it taken place on the other side of the pitch, away from the benches, it may not have resulted in the same colour of card. But you're right. Do Sunderland's players, do you want a team now that's going to get embroiled in sort of amateur theatricals when they get tackled just to try and get decisions? I don't know. There's a sort of moral question, isn't there, for your team, and the type of team that you want to be watching. But it's unquestionably a tactic used by the likes of Steve Evans and, Charlton. We saw them use that. Gareth Ainsworth, they use that because they know they haven't got the quality on the pitch to sort of basically compensate for the quality they're playing against.
It's one of those things, isn't it? I would much rather that we did the right thing and we didn't go down and we didn't throw ourselves around. But there's a fine line between that moral side of it, as you say, Nick, and actually being streetwise enough to get results in League One. And I think it's a fine balancing act sometimes, isn't it? And maybe sometimes we do have to play the game a little bit, but I would rather us not do that.
Well, I think we've got. I think there's one player that does do it. I mean, with all due respect to him, I think Luke O'Neill is quite wily in that respect. And we've spoken to Lee Johnson about Luke O'Neill, and Lee would admit himself, Luke is a bit of a worky ticket, and he does wind players up. At the same time, he is targeted because of his shoulder problem, and I think players of the opposition teams do know that if you wind Luke O'Neill up, they will get a reaction. So it's not that Sunderland haven't got those players, but I think as a rule, you don't want to see them sort of suddenly finding you've got 11 players who are going to be, to sort of go down that road, if you like.
Yeah, no, that's right. And look, I think when the game went on, we could see what the referee was going to be like. And look, as we've said, the performance of the referee doesn't offer any excuses for us not winning the game. I think we've got to be good enough and wily enough and smart enough to adapt to whatever circumstances are thrown at us and whatever circumstances we face. And we've got to find different ways of winning. And we really struggled to get a foothold in the game. Once Charlton started pressing us and coming at us, we looked a little bit lost. And, you look at the team, and I thought Ross Stewart, again, had a great game, but he was running much wider than he has done in previous games. He was having to force himself out wide to get the ball, which obviously created a gap between the midfield joining him and him playing up front. The defence was solid enough. Obviously, they had Stockley and Washington to deal with, but Hoffman played well. He came out and got a great cross in the second half, didn't he? He claimed brilliantly. I thought Doyle and Flanagan had a tough afternoon, but they performed well. I thought Serkin was actually really good. I tell you what, he's a player who I just like watching. His touch on the ball is beautiful. He reminds me of Julio. He's just such a nice, composed player. And Winchester at right back had a steady enough game, but in between Ross Stewart and defence, it didn't quite work. Luke O'Neill and Dan Neil were a bit lost and isolated in midfield. They always seem to be outnumbered in midfield. And then you had the three across the front behind Stewart, where I thought Pritchard did all right, but McGeady, he's just come back from injury. To be fair, been rushed back from injury, I think. But he's 35 now, and whether we just put his age as an automatic thing against him whenever he has a poor performance or not. But, he is coming back from injury. He missed pre-season, so there's got to be that to consider as well. O'Brien didn't have the best of games, and he doesn't really give you that much width as other people do. And I think when Gooch came on, for example, he showed a bit more, didn't he? He had that energy, that aggression. But Malc, like you, I was surprised we didn't make changes, certainly at half-time. I would have liked to seen Corey Evans come on at half-time just to give a little bit more stability and bite in that midfield and try to regain some of that territorial advantage that we'd kind of given up to Charlton in the first half. What were you thinking at half-time?
I was thinking pretty much the same, Martin. To give credit to Charlton where it's due in small aspects. They used the bully boy tactics, and we didn't deal with that very well, but they used them on the right areas of the pitch. They didn't give O'Neill any time on the ball whatsoever. And he's, 18, 19? He's still learning, and when he's playing against, big idiots running flat out at him for 85 minutes, and he hasn't got time to think on the ball. If they can execute that tactic well, then they're going to stop a lot of the quality of link play between the defence, midfield and forwards. And I think, to be fair to Charlton, their midfield did that quite well. They kind of bullied ONeill out of the game and crowded O'Neill out of it, so that all we had was width, which is what we didn't have. We didn't have McGeady taking people on. I mentioned in one of our chats on the WhatsApp group, McGeady in the second half was right in front of me in that lower east stand, and the amount of times he got the ball down the right hand wing, and he had a wide centre half in front of him. Did he go past him? Did he L? 3-4 times I could count. And he didn't take the bloke on. So if he has been rushed back from injury, then fair enough. But if that's the case, swap him at half time and let Gooch take that guy on for the second half. Give Gooch 40 minutes, 45 minutes, and make a difference, But yeah, we lost the battle in terms of physicality and how we handled that. But we also, I do think the caretaker manager from Charlton was reasonably wily in cutting out our kind of channels through the middle. And by doing that, and without real width that was being effective, I agree. I think Pritchard had a good game. I think Stewart had a good game, but he was ploughing a very lone furrow, as you said, towards the corner flags often more than not. But McGeady he didn't play well at all. And if that's him rushed back, then I think the coaching team have made the wrong decision on which player to put in that position, or the formation we used with the players we got available. We should have made different changes at halftime, in my opinion, both tactically and personnel-wise, and we didn't. So all we can do now is hope that as a squad and a coaching team, we learn from that and we think about teams that might come with that approach in a different manner. I have to say, though, I'm a little bit disappointed for Charlton, because Charlton's a decent club. If I was a lifelong Charlton fan, would I want my team to suddenly become another Wickham and get promoted through that set of tactics? No, I bloody wouldn't, So, and they sang their hearts out all the way through the game, to be honest. So, I've got a lot of time for the fans, even though we've had challenges with them over the years. But if I was in their shoes, I wouldn't want my team to be that. I'd want my team to be where we've been heading, So, but if they're happy with that and it gets them out of the pickle they're in at the minute, I suppose they'll take it at least short term,
I think after 2 wins all season, you're going to take a win by any method, aren't you, at that point of the season?
Yeah. It's whether that becomes the long-term approach, though, Martin. If it does,
that's
then
right.
The fans will sharp get unresty about it, and they'll start thinking, are we really just another, long ball kick the other team in the shins team, or can we actually play footy?
Going back to McGeady for a little bit, Nick, we've obviously got Diaku on the bench, who's come back in the last couple of games and obviously scored a wonderful goal on Tuesday against Crewe, and looked dangerous when he came back on. He gets an awful lot of power into his shots, doesn't he? So he looks as if he's got an awful lot of potential. Gooch is coming back. We've got Embleton, who's going to return from suspension. We've got Pritchard, who can play in those wider attacking areas as well. So, it's not necessarily a case now that we've only got McGeady to play on the left wing, so he's got to play every week. And there's part of me that thinks, at his age, which again, we shouldn't just say about his age so he can't play every week and he can't play the full game, but to have McGeady on the bench, to come onto the field with 15, 20, 25 minutes remaining of a game, to me, that's a hell of a weapon for a side to have, coming on against a tired defence. Is that, potentially, do we see Johnson moving to utilising McGeady in that sort of way more? Or do we think it's just McGeady's returning to fitness, he's still got an awful lot to offer, and he's going to play his part from the start as much as he is going to play a part from the bench?
I think McGeady's inclusion this weekend was because at Crewe it was the only option. If he was, he was trying to get players back from injury, and McGeady was the closest to coming back. So he put him into the team, and they won 4-0. And I think it was then, I don't think anybody at the start of the game would have objected to that starting 11 against Charlton, because they'd won 4-0 in the week. And I think we'll all accept. Just listening to the discussion here, everybody's come out having had a good game, apart from McGeady. Now, we didn't necessarily foresee that. And I think it's true. I don't think anybody did have a bad game overall, except McGeady. And I think, all those reasons, Malcolm was saying about, and you were saying about him coming back maybe a little bit too early from injury and not being fully fit and the age and so on. I think going forwards, you're absolutely right. I think McGeady's going to be used more as a player, impact player off the bench, because Lee Johnson said the age that he is, although McGeady will actually disagree with you and argue very strongly that he can play every game, because I've had that conversation with him after Fleetwood. But I think Lee Johnson's attitude to him will be he's not going to be able to play 2 games a week. And so he's going to find himself more as the sort of impact player off the bench, because you've got Gooch, you've got Diaku, and we'll have Broadhead coming back. And they, I think, are going to be ahead of Aidan McGeady on the whole in the starting 11 as we go forwards. But I think overall, I mean, in terms of the discussion about substitutions, yes, I think the substitution should have probably been made earlier against Charlton. No, I don't think managers ever will do it at half time unless things are going so drastically wrong that they're forced to do that. I mean, if they're 2 or 3-0 down maybe at half time, I think, you may well see a manager make changes. But I think at half time against Charlton, because it was 0-0, and I always had a feeling about the game that whoever scored first would probably win it, and probably only win it 1-0. It just seemed to have that sort of feel about it. I think Lee Johnson's feeling was we plug away the way that we are. The one player they didn't get a hold of against Charlton was Lecco as well as Stockley. I thought Jonathan Lecco had a very good game for Charlton, and they gave him way too much space down that right-hand side. And I think if they could have got a grip and had a stroke of luck and got the first goal, and they did create chances, it would have been a different game. I think, Sunderland probably would have gone on to win the game. I think Charlton's confidence would have sort of ebbed away, I think, if they'd gone behind. I mean, from what I was being told by the Charlton press lot, they were sort of saying if Sunderland score first, you'll watch the confidence just sort of wash away from Charlton. And I think that's what Lee Johnson was pinning his hopes on getting that first goal. But of course, in the end, they conceded what was a horrible, scrappy, confusing, it's just a mess. I mean, but it came from Lecco. I mean, and I think that was the key. They didn't keep Lecco quiet.
I don't want this to be the McGeady beaten show, but the one thing I will say is, in the second half, we got a free kick and Luke ONeill took it. Now, if McGeady is fit, right, why on earth is McGeady not having a go at that? And that's in the second half when he's already played a full 45 plus some. So for me, if a player is going onto the pitch and he can't deliver one of the things that he's been delivering over the years for, at some of the highest levels of quality, then there's an argument that he just shouldn't have even started the game, never mind being subbed off. Why on earth Luke ONeill's taking that free kick? It just absolutely befuddles me.
Well, he must be putting 9 out of 10 into the top corner in training every week, mustn't he? Because we've not seen any evidence whatsoever on the field that he can take a good.
He's been skying them all over the place, hasn't he?
It's bizarre, isn't it? But yeah, he must be doing it at the Academy of Light. So Charlton's goal, Stockley, who maybe shouldn't have been on the pitch, got a header and it kind of went in via Luke ONeill's hand, maybe. There was potentially a foul on Pritchard, I think, in the build-up, potentially a foul on Flanagan for the goal. But it'd been coming, hadn't it? I think Purrington had a sort of Ronnie Rosenthal-esque miss from about a yard out, didn't he, where he managed to put it past the far post with an open goal. Just before that, then we had another scramble in the box where bodies were flying left, right and centre to block the ball. So it wasn't a surprise that Charlton managed to get the goal, but it was a bloody scrappy one to concede, wasn't it, Nick?
It was horrible. It was just horrible. I mean, we sitting where we are, we're so high up. It's sometimes it's difficult to try and assimilate what's actually happened. But I mean, it was just messy. I mean, you're right. Stockley threw himself in there. From sort of the memory of it, it seemed to come off the bar, drop down. There's an argument across the line when it came down off the bar, and then ONeill sticks his hand out. Stockley goes crashing through whoever was on the line. The ball ends up in the back of the net. The assistant puts his flag up and you're not sure whether he's waving for a free kick or he's waving that the goal's been given. The referee took what appeared to be an age to give the decision that the goal was a goal. Meantime, Charlton's players they'd gone off onto the far side to celebrate, but I think they weren't entirely sure themselves the goal had been given. It was in a way, it was sort of a metaphor for the game, and we've seen it before Portsmouth did it to an extent. When players like Stockley stand on the goalkeeper and they flock in the 6-yard box, Sunderland's defenders, they don't show a huge deal of finesse in dealing with those situations. Ironically, one player that Sunderland did have last season, who, while he was he's much derided in some quarters, and we've had plenty of discussion over him, Charlie White was actually a very, very good defender. When Sunderland were up against teams like that, White back in defence was one big player who could deal with those sort of situations. And I don't think at the moment Sunderland have got a player of his sort of size and the way that he could sort of make himself big in those situations, and that's cost them, I think, a couple of goals this season.
It certainly has, and I think that's the one thing that potentially Bailey Wright gives you at centre half as well. When those crosses are coming in, he's got a little bit more presence than maybe Flanagan has, but it's just a scrappy one to concede. But it's one of those things. If we'd taken our chances in the first half, that goal doesn't.
I mean, that's the key again. I think we said in the build up to the game, the key in this game is scoring first. Whoever scores first has got a massive advantage. And clearly, if Sunderland had scored first at home with that sort of 32,000 crowd, albeit how many there were from Charlton, 30,000 crowd, I think Charlton would have lost. But they got that first goal, and they knew that they were wily enough to know how to hang on to it. And really, in the end, Sunderland was sort of slightly headless, trying to get the equaliser. You always got a sense they were going to play on right through the weekend and probably not score.
And Charlton straight away sort of turned up the time wasting tactics in the Malc, and everything was abysmal, really, wasn't it? It was taking minutes to take throw-ins and all sorts of stuff, but
again, we come back to the referee. Darren Drysdale didn't deal with it. He should have nipped that in the bud early on and made it quite clear he wasn't going to stand for time wasting. Charlton pushed the buttons. They exploited it, and they put pressure on Darren Drysdale, and he wilted with that. He didn't deal with it.
Yeah, I agree.
And we made some subs, didn't we? Gooch came on. I think, as I said before, I think Gooch added a lot just in terms of his pace and his aggression and his willingness to get at the defence. And there was a point where he was pulled back by the neck and he didn't get a free kick. He was potentially clean through, wasn't he? But I think, as we said before, Diaku came on and had a little bit of an impact. Had a nice shot that just went over the bar, but the power he got in that shot was superb. But the biggest opportunity we had, obviously, was a penalty shot, wasn't it? The ball came in from the right-hand side. Ross Stewart, edge of the 6-yard box, struck it really well, destined for goal. Whether the goalkeeper would have saved it or not is another matter. But it quite clearly struck their defender's left arm, didn't it? Was it a little bit too close to be given as a penalty?
My gut feeling was it's too close. I think, there's no question it hit his arm, it hit his hand, I think if he'd been a yard further back or the shot had been struck 2 yards further back, I think it would have been given. Well, actually, I'm not so sure with this referee, but in the normal run of events, I think it would have probably been given. I think the fact he was so close, the benefit of the doubt falls to the defender, because I don't think he didn't raise his arm to any great degree. His arms were still down pretty much to his side, and it struck him down fairly low. I do think I will give Darren Drysdale the benefit of the doubt in this particular instance.
You're a generous man, Nick.
Yeah, I just think if it had been given, I think it would have been a harsh penalty to give in the circumstances. But, there is the other side of the argument. The rule is if it strikes your hand, then it's a goal opportunity, then it's a penalty. But I think sometimes, I think if that had happened to Sunderland, if it had been a Sunderland defender who'd had that happen to them, I think we'd be arguing here that it was a harsh penalty. So yeah. I think ultimately I'm going to sort of veer towards it was probably the right decision.
Malc?
So Nick, I've got a lot of respect for what you do, mate, but I have to fundamentally disagree. I'll quickly say I've only seen it from the lower east stand. I haven't seen the highlights on Quest or whatever yet, but I was looking straight behind the linesman and across the Charlton penalty area. But I saw the ball leave that crowd of players and I saw it clearly strike the arm of that player. Now, if there's a gap that you can see from 40 yards away in the crowd between the ball leaving and hitting the the defender's arm, surely that's far enough away for that to be a penalty. It was absolutely, it was on target. As you said, Martin, he might have saved it, but then if the shot has been stopped from even challenging the goalkeeper, then the penalty's got to be given to give you another chance from the spot. But it's one of them where, as we said at the start of the chat, we're expecting inadequate professional, referees and linesmen to make difficult decisions, and they're not going to do that because they bottled pretty much every other decision around the park. Why are they going to do that in the second half when we were fighting back to try and get at least a point? If we'd have taken the better chances, that double shot where I think it was Winch came in from the far side and drilled it back across the keeper, didn't he, in the first half? If we'd taken one of them, or the one that hit the corner of the crossbar and the post, then it would have been irrelevant. But I do think it was a penalty, but I haven't seen the replays. So based on live, I would have given it if I was the linesman, absolutely.
I think Lee Johnson said that the referee told him he hadn't given it because the defender had his arms behind his back and it hadn't hit his arm. So
that's ridiculous. I mean, it did hit his arm. There's no question about that. I've got no problem with that. It definitely hit his arm. Malcolm, I completely respect your decision for not agreeing with me, but I don't think it was intentional.
Oh no, it wasn't intentional.
And I do think the speed of the ball hitting him, I think, and that, as Lee Johnson said afterwards, he thinks ultimately it was the distance between the ball being struck and where the defender was, and I think it's one of those we could argue all night, and I think we probably still wouldn't come. Thank God we haven't got VAR, but I do think it's one of those that is unresolvable in some ways because it's such a grey area. I mean, handball in penalty areas always has been, and I think this is a clear case of why handball in the penalty area is such a difficult issue.
From a Sunderland perspective, it's a definite penalty. If it was given against us, no chance. Really harsh. So I think it's one of those, isn't it, that if it's for you, you'll take it. If it goes against you, you complain about it. And I think Charlton would have rightly had some complaints, but they couldn't have had too many if it had been given. But the game ended with a 1-0 defeat, didn't it? And it's obviously it's disappointing to lose that unbeaten home record. And it's going to be it's going to be interesting to see how we respond to it, because there's a big challenge over the next few weeks. We've got QPR in the Cup, and then we've got Rotherham away on Saturday. We've got Sheffield Wednesday away on the Tuesday or the Wednesday. I think it's certainly in the midweek. I think there's an international break somewhere in the middle there, isn't it? Then we've got Ipswich after that. So we've got a tough run of fixtures coming up. And this next 4 or 5 weeks could really determine the course of the season, couldn't it? There's so many tough games on paper there. We're playing teams that we expect to be challenging up the top there. And it's a big test for the side, isn't it, Nick?
It is, but I look forward to this. And I think in terms of the football that we played, I think the problem is you're playing teams like Charlton who are fighting for their lives, and they have and they clearly proved that in the way that they played. I think the game against Queen's Park Rangers will be a completely different game. Because they're doing well in the Championship now. How much they change their team is open to question. I think they played quite a strong team in the last round, and there's every chance now they're in the fourth round that they could play a strong team. But I think it'll be a totally different game. It'll be a footballing game, and I think it'll be. Look, for Sunderland, it's a free hit. It's strangely in the same way that the game for Charlton was a free hit. Sunderland have got nothing to lose going to Queen's Park Rangers and having a go. Or if they lose, they lose. It's not the end of the world. It's not the league. Rotherham, again, I just think it'll be a very good game. I think, Rotherham, Paul Warner's got a very fit squad. He's well versed in knowing how to get out of League One. They've become a bit of a yo-yo club, haven't they, in the last few years? But I think Sunderland will be able to play their game at Rotherham, and I think they'll be able to play their game at Sheffield Wednesday as well. I think in terms of, yes, they're against the sort of top sides again, but I'd rather that than be going into scraps every week with teams who are trying to sort of fight their way to safety, if you like. I mean, I don't think, apart from maybe Wickham, any team in the top 6 or 7 are gonna be those sort of teams. I think they're all going to be footballing teams, and so I think there'll be games to relish in lots of ways. I don't think I've got nothing to fear personally in the way that Sunderland have been set up and the way they've been winning games this season, the way they're playing games. I've nothing to fear going to Rotherham and Sheffield Wednesday and those games that are coming up. I'm actually thinking these are games that probably Sunderland, are the favourites to win just because they have been playing such good football.
And we're going into those games with players returning from injury as well. With QPR, what sort of team would you pick for that game, Malc? Obviously, there's one school of thought which would say the lads would want to bounce back from Saturday's defeat, play the majority of them, get some confidence before we go on again on Saturday. The other school of thought is get some fitness into the legs of the players who are just coming back, rest the players who are critically important to the team, the likes of Ross Stewart and people like that. So
I think it needs to be a combination of rotation, fitness improvement, and tactical and strategic assessment for me, Martin. I don't care about the result. We've done well to get to the round that we have it's the Carabao Cup, isn't it? We've done well to get where we have, but I don't give a monkeys about the result. I want the coaching team to drop people who deserve to potentially be dropped and give other people a chance. I think we need to send that message that when you don't quite play your best, we've got a big, deep squad that can offer other options. I think we should expect QPR to rest a few of their players, especially after watching us, seeing the result from Saturday. So I don't think there's much point in expecting them putting a full side out. So there's a chance for the youth. But the most important thing for me is, learning from Saturday, learning about what else we can do when we might be facing that kind of challenge again, and giving minutes to the youngsters and the lads who are coming back from fitness to get ourselves most optimally prepared for next weekend and the other games beyond. Because even though they are more footballing sides than the likes of Wickham and the way Charlton played on Saturday, we've got to get back on the winning ways as quick as possible. As you say, the next 5 weeks are going to be critical, Martin. That'll take us kind of towards Christmas. And everybody says all the old, the old adages are, have a look at the table at Christmas. That'll give you a real view of who's going to be up there or thereabouts. We can't afford to drop off now. We need to get back on the winning run, starting with what's going to be challenging games, but there will be footballing games. I agree with Nick in that aspect. So our approach and our talent should serve us reasonably well.
And Nick, did Lee Johnson give any hints about what sort of team he'll put out?
No, very much a case that he doesn't like trying to sort of think about, picking a team straight after a game, especially when he's just lost. And sometimes he can be a bit more open with his thoughts on the team because he's got more players available. But I think he's in this dilemma at the minute. He's got, the likes of Gooch and Evans and Broadhead not being far away from coming back. And, how does he play? Where's the balancing act, against the championship team? Does he weaken the team significantly? I use that word weaken actually in inverted commas because I think the players that have come in the past few weeks have done an absolutely sterling job. The younger players, the Stephen Wearns, Will Harris, etc. I think they've done an excellent job, and I think it is slightly sort of disrespectful to say weakened team, but I think he's got a balance to find. I think he's got a balance to strike because he doesn't want to go to Queen's Park Rangers and be railroaded by the championship team, but at the same time he wants to put to give a good fight and try and sort of go toe to toe with them. I think there will be changes. I think he will be mindful of the Rotherham game at the weekend and mindful of the fact that Evans and Gooch are only just coming back. So it's going to be quite intriguing to see what 11 he goes with in the end. And I think he probably might be a little bit circumspect in thinking that Queen's Park Rangers probably will make changes. So that gives him a little bit of leeway, if you like, if he wants to play a Stephen Wearn or he wants to bring in, one or two of the other younger players. So I think we'll see. I'm almost certain we'll see changes, and I think we'll see a bit of a mix. But I'm not so sure we'll see wholesale changes. I think he'll still field what would be considered a strong first 11.
And there's potentially a good opportunity for Lee Johnson and the players on the fringes, isn't it? And we had the same after the Fleetwood game where we conceded the last minute penalty, didn't we? Where we went to Wigan, made a few changes, a lot of the players impressed, and they're really knocking on the door for the next game. So it's a great opportunity. And we'll see what happens over the coming week. It's a big week, I think, for us for our season.
It is. In terms of personal, I wouldn't be at all surprised to say Denver Hume came in for Sirkin, Bailey Wright comes in possibly for Doyle. So you can see that now he's got opportunities to play, to change the team and not significantly change it, if you see what I mean. Because Hume we know what he can deliver. Bailey Wright, we know what Bailey and Bailey Wright. Look, this is Bailey Wright going back to one of his former clubs. And we know we've just talked about that discussion about Bailey Wright being the sort of bigger player in defence that can deal with, if they get balls played into the sort of danger areas. So you can see, midfield he might switch Neil for Evans to give him minutes ahead of the weekend. So you can see how the dynamic can change without changing, if you see what I mean, because you've now got the players that he can do that. He can afford to do that.
Right, I think we've dissected all of that for long enough. I think we'll just push that to one side now, because I think the important thing for all of us to remember is that this season's going to have a few ups and downs. It's going to have a few games like Saturday. We're not going to win every game, but I think we're on the right track. I still think we are so far better off than we were last season. Everything's kind of ticking a lot of boxes on and off the field, and it'll just be interesting to hear how this group of players reacts. But we've praised them an awful lot for the mental strength and the sort of fortitude that they've shown, and I've got no doubt that they'll just repeat that. They'll show us again over the coming weeks that they have got that mental strength, and we've got the talent, and that's the key thing. We've got the talent, we've got the players coming back to fitness. I think there's still an awful lot to be positive about, and we'll keep our fingers crossed it all falls into place again over the coming weeks. Nick, thank you very much for joining us today. Always a pleasure.
No problem. I just want to quickly add to that. I think it's worth remembering that we're 12, 13 games into the league season. They've already played four games in the League Cup, 2 games in the Football League Trophy, and yet this is a squad that's still a point off the top with a couple of games in hand. So for all the setbacks, the few setbacks they've had, they're still in pole position. And I think that's quite interesting, because in the past 3 seasons, they've not been in that position. They've always been in the top 6 or top 8, but now they found themselves in the top 4, and they've not really dropped out of that. They've, most of the time they've been in the top 2. And I just think now that is a good sign. I think, it's a good omen for the sort of coming months. No, it is. And I think it's really interesting as well when you look at even the points per game, which obviously everybody became a lot more aware of a couple of seasons ago. But, on average, 2 points per game will get you promoted. And we're still tracking above 2 points per game. Other teams are as well. A lot of other teams have had good starts to the season as we have, but we're still tracking over 2 points per game. And I think if we just keep that going and concentrate on ourselves and not be too worried about what's going on around us and whether we're in the top 2 or whether we're 4th, just concentrate on what we're doing and the points that we're accumulating. That's all we can do. And I think ultimately we'll be all right come the end of the season. But that's an awful long way off. Malc, thank you very much for your time this morning, mate. Always a pleasure again.
Likewise, Martin. Yeah, let's just keep focusing on the marathon, not the sprint. I totally agree with what you guys are saying. Long way to go yet. We're in the right direction. Who would have thought we'd get 6 points from them 2 away games and then lose that one? But as long as we keep that average up,
it's Sunderland.
We'll get there.
And also keep an eye out on the website. There's tons of content going up there every day, all written by Sunderland fans. One article I'd like to draw your attention to this week, we've actually got an interview with a fan who saw Rach Carter play. I think his first game was 1939, ironically against Charlton. So that's a really nice feature, and it's one that we're going to start doing regularly. So if you or somebody you know has memories of going to the games in 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, whenever it is, drop us a line, rokerreport@yahoo.co.uk. Drop us a line and let us know, and we'll figure out an interview and get some memories. Because I think they're the really important things to capture. They're the fabric of the football club, and what makes a football club special. And those stories from supporters are brilliant. So we love hearing about those. But yeah, drop us a line, get in touch. And thank you very much for listening